Now I am so happy to introduce Rabbi David Abramson, who is someone who needs no introduction in our community, but I'm going to give him a little one. He's a chaplain at Jessa and our adjunct rabbi here at Bethel, and he does so much, you might not even know all that he does. He's a leader in our daily minyan. He also in the early minyan. He also teaches and people of all ages, including our B'nai Mitzvah students. And I'll just say as a personal note, when I have two funerals back to back, which I do this week, and Rabbi Harris is on vacation, he always offers and always helps, and in this case offered to teach this morning when we had a last minute opening. And he's always so generous, and he's a brilliant teacher, so what you're getting is always excellent. And he's a true mensch, as you all already know, but sometimes it's important to say the things that we all already know. So I'm so happy to introduce Rabbi David Abramson.
Well, thank you for those overly generous words of introduction. I've been a rabbi for 41 years, and I do not know the difference between a sermon and a Devar Torah. If it's formal and pompous and inaccessible, it's a sermon, and if it's informal and unassuming and accessible, it's a Devar Torah. Or if it's long, it's a sermon. If it's short, it's a Devar Torah. I'm still not really sure, but I did get an email from Rabbi Megdal earlier this week mentioning that in addition to Rabbi Harris being away, a rabbi's week becomes much busier when there's a funeral or even more than one funeral. Back when I was a full-time pulpit rabbi, and a normal full-time week was 60 or 70 hours, and that's probably the case for our full-time rabbis here at Bethel. When a rabbi has a funeral, that adds approximately 8 hours to that rabbi's work week, and that doesn't mean that there are 8 hours worth of stuff that you can get away with not doing that week. So being a rabbi in a busy shul is a burdensome sort of thing, sometimes at least, and so not completely surprising. I got an email earlier this week from Rabbi Megdal asking me, in view of the fact that the person who is going to be doing the guest sermon or the guest Devar Torah this Shabbat had some kind of family conflict, and so was unable, more or less at the last minute. So would I be willing to do the Devar Torah this week? Well, I didn't have time to prepare a sermon in that amount of time, but I did tell Rabbi Megdal that I was going to be rabbiing at the early service on this Shabbat, 2 hours earlier here, or maybe 3 or whatever. Math is not my strength, as you know. And so I offered to do a slightly longer version of my introductory comments to the Torah portion that I had done at the 7:30 service. So that's what I agreed to do, a slightly longer version. And I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, God, why didn't we go to the early service this week? I want to draw your attention to about 5 or 6 verses in this morning's Parsha, but one verse in particular. You can follow in the Chumash or not, but beginning on page 957 and into 958. I'm speaking specifically of Numbers chapter 33, verses about 50 to 55, 957 and 958. But I want to draw your attention specifically to verse 52 at the top of page 958. The Israelites are being given instructions about what they're going to do once they enter the Holy Land. As Rabbi Megdal said earlier on this morning, here at the end of Numbers, the Israelites are getting ready, or preparing themselves, or being prepared for their return to their ancestral homeland. They've been away for a few centuries, and not surprisingly, there are other people who are there, and so the task of the Israelites to establish themselves in the Holy Land will involve dispossessing the current residents. Now remember, this land is the first foundation of the covenantal relationship between, God and Abraham, to include all of Abraham's descendants. And so the promise of the land and the presence of the land not only is a place for the Israelites to live, but even in their consciousness when they're not living there, that's foundational for us. And so entering the land was no minor thing. I want to draw your attention in particular to verse 52, which begins by talking about dispossessing the inhabitants of the land, but then it goes further. And you shall destroy all their figured objects, you shall destroy their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. Now, arguably, this whole passage might be directly related to the present situation in Israel and in Gaza, or indirectly related, or not related at all. That's a complicated conversation, but not for today. I want to concentrate on verse 52, the mitzvah, the commandment, not only to dispossess the inhabitants, but to destroy their idols, their holy places, their cult places. Does it remind you of anything? Not in the ancient Near East, but a little more recent. Remember the Buddhas of Bamiyan, the 6th century Buddhist statues in Afghanistan that were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001? What they were doing, what the Taliban was doing, what offended so many people here in the modern world 20-something years ago, that's what this verse is telling our ancestors to do, right? Destroy their idols, destroy their holy places when you take possession of the land. You know, destroying art is offensive enough for many of us, but destroying other religious traditions, sacred art, that's even more offensive. And that's exactly what the Israelites are being commanded to do in our portion. And I think therefore we need to remind ourselves not only of verse 52 in the context of verses 50 to 55. It's not a standalone verse in the Torah. It is in a context, and we need to remind ourselves of that context, and especially of the even larger context. And we're going to see this theme repeating itself a lot in Deuteronomy when we begin the book of Devarim next week and the weeks following. The essential point is paganism and the danger of paganism to the Israelites who are going to be returning to their ancestral homeland. The religion of Israel emerged as one of the most important revolutions in the history of religion. Ethical monotheism was a religion against the paganism of the ancient Near East. And the Bible is, among other things, a manifesto of that revolution. If you want to refresh your memory, if you haven't read Nahum Sarna's Understanding Genesis, since that Introduction to Ancient Israel class you took in undergraduate school, or even if you never read it, pick up the book. It's absolutely a gem, and it will change the way you see the religion of Israel, and therefore, I think, the way you see contemporary Judaism as well. So read Sarna, reread Sarna, and you'll rediscover that that's what that was and remains a major concern of the Torah, namely paganism on the one hand, and in contrast, the ethical monotheism that the religion of Israel brought to the world. Of course, the Torah prohibits the worship of other gods, and idolatry and paganism are unquestionably forbidden by the Torah. And so on a certain level, perhaps it's no surprise that biblical law forbids many other things that may not be pagan in and of themselves, but are forbidden because of their association with paganism. For example, halakhically serious Jews who shave their faces probably in many cases use electric razors. Why? Well, it's an accommodation to the biblical prohibition against shaving the edges of one's beard. Shaving one's face is not a sin in and of itself, but in the ancient Near East, it was the pagans who shaved their faces or their heads in these patterns and those patterns, and it was the ancient Israelites who did not shave their faces. And so even something like shaving your face is forbidden by biblical law, not because there's anything really wrong with it, but because of its association with paganism. And what about tattooing? So earlier this week, I don't remember if it was before or after I started thinking about this Devar Torah this week, but earlier this week, I was sitting in my endodontist's office, and as he's digging and hacking and scraping away, he's talking to his dental technician. Now, I knew that the dentist was Jewish. I didn't realize until he happened to have mentioned it the other day that he was Orthodox when he was young. And I'm not sure exactly what his Jewish involvement is these days. But the dental technician was also Jewish. And they were talking about burial and cremation and I can't be buried with my girlfriend if I marry her because, and the doctor said to the tech, because you're a Kohen? No, that wasn't the reason. And I'm sitting with my, all that contraption in my mouth, not saying anything, until the tech says, no, I can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery because of my tattoo. At which point I'm going, When I was able to speak after, 10 minutes or so later, I explained that the prohibition about you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo, as far as I know, that came from Lenny Bruce's grandmother. And when he came back from the army with a tattoo, it probably was, the old style tattoo, Mom or something on his shoulder, on his arm, and his grandmother said, oh no, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, which is not true. Tattooing is forbidden by biblical law, but still, you can still be buried in a Jewish cemetery. I mean, I have my own opinion about tattoos. I don't understand why somebody would want to make his or her arm look like a 1970s New York subway car. And I lived in New York in the 70s. Believe me, it was not a pretty picture. But it's not just the aesthetics of tattooing. Leviticus 19:28 says, do not put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am Adonai. It's not because you're afraid that you won't be able to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Ancient Near Eastern pagans tattoo themselves. We Israelites don't tattoo ourselves. So again, it's one of those things that was associated with paganism, and because of that, it's forbidden by Jewish law. And what about drinking wine made by non-Israelites? In the ancient Near East, non-Israelites were pagan, and non-Israelite wine, it can be assumed, was made for pagan ritual purposes, maybe also for simply drinking in a secular sense. But if a non-Israelite made wine, we Israelites were not allowed to drink that wine because of its association with paganism. So there are things that are associated with paganism that we're not allowed to do simply because of that association. And in that context, the commandment to destroy pagan idols makes a certain sense, at least a certain theological sense. In addition to avoiding various things simply because of their association with paganism, actual pagan idols and holy places should be destroyed. But to me, that's what's really problematic, the attitude behind the mitzvah. Our assertion that our religion is legitimate and therefore other religions are not legitimate. Except religions have been making those assertions for millennia. That's the nature of most religions, at least at some time in their evolution. In ancient Judaism, the Torah asserts, and the point is made even more strongly by the biblical prophets after the time of the Torah, ours is the right religion, all the others are the wrong religions. Lahavdil, in Christianity, this is called triumphalism, the belief that one day Christianity will triumph over the other religions, the wrong religion. One day, everybody will be a Christian as Christianity triumphs over those wrong religions. If that offends you, well, maybe it should, but check out Aleinu. Yes. We did make that assertion. We did in Torah times, we did in prophetic times, and we did even in early rabbinic times, as is reflected by what started off as a Rosh Hashanah prayer, but it became so meaningful that we say it at the end of all of our services. And yet, check it out. So this passage challenges us. If it offends us, if we're reminded of the Taliban or other people disrespecting other people's religious traditions and even religious objects, well, it should bother us. But I think that's the importance of this passage, to challenge us, to confront our own particularism, to struggle with the line between particularism and chauvinism, the line between pride in our Judaism and denigrating other religious traditions. And I think that's an important issue for all of us to struggle with. Shabbat Shalom.